States are pledging trillions of dollars in investments just from Mohammed bin Salman. President Donald Trump is looking at $1 trillion investment. And for Saudi, on their part, they want to diversify their economy. They want to strike up big weapons sales deals with the United States, a big focus on technology and AI. But as you say, the beating heart of the Arab street is the Palestinian issue. And while publicly we won't necessarily see big declarations being made by Mohammed bin Salman, behind the scenes it is expected that this issue will be discussed. The Abraham Accords, of course, was a big win for Donald Trump in his first presidency. In fact, he talked about the fact that he should have won a Nobel Peace Prize for normalizing relations with the likes of the United Arab Emirates. But the big focus at the time was Saudi Arabia. And up until October 6, 2023, the big talk was that they had even drawn up papers to normalize relations between Saudi Arabia and Israel. And Mark, you and I were talking to some young people just in the last day or so who said that the issue of Israel wasn't necessarily a big talking point for young people in Saudi Arabia. They didn't see why normalization couldn't take place. But now, of course, it has become an issue, and certainly for a generation in Saudi Arabia who want to see Palestinian statehood, and that is the leverage that they have. They've put that on the table. They said to the Biden administration, we are not going to normalize any relations until A, the violence stops, but B, there is a pathway to a Palestinian state. And just in the last day or so, when you and I were making our journey from London to Saudi Arabia, we heard news of the United States in talks with Hamas, an American-Israeli hostage released as part of a goodwill gesture from Hamas, the last of the American-Israeli hostages held in captivity for the last 20 months or so. And we'll have to see how that transpires, whether that leads to some kind of a ceasefire a deal in Gaza between Israel and Hamas, because of course that is something that has been top of the agenda for the Qataris as well, which is where he'll find himself in the next day or so.
Yeah, and it's very interesting that the State Department, spokespeople from the State Department who have been talking to Middle Eastern media over the course of this morning are briefing that the United States is coordinating with Riyadh to end the war in Gaza. So I think that's the first kind of more official signal to us that Gaza really will be an issue. You know, so often you hear people saying, look, the Saudis don't really care about the Palestinian issue. It is true that perhaps like many countries, they care about themselves, number one. They care about investment, number one. But behind that, and with the new leverage that they have now got, of course, the Saudi leadership is very concerned about what is happening in Gaza. And so I think it's interesting to note that the State Department is being upfront now, that they are saying that the two countries are coordinating to end the war in Gaza. And it is also, I guess, no coincidence that the release of the last living Israeli-American hostage came just yesterday. Steve Witkoff, who is kind of the Swiss Army knife, it seems, of Donald Trump's administration. He is applied to so many different challenges. He is the real estate mogul from New York turned diplomat with relative degrees of success. But certainly it seems on the Israel-Gaza conflict, he is having some success on Ukraine, Russia, where he is also applying his skills, maybe less success. Many believe that he is being played by Vladimir Putin, but Witkoff, when it comes to Israel, I'm told he has been pretty frustrated with the Israeli leadership, with Benjamin Netanyahu of late, and it was the coordination at the weekend with the Qataris and with Hamas that secured the release of that last Israeli-American hostage. That was incidentally without the coordination of the Israelis, which is remarkable indeed. I think an attempt to kickstart the ceasefire process there. So many things, Yalda, moving very, very fast. As we said last night, it's kind of like Donald Trump is is galloping ahead on many different horses. He'll fall off one or two of them, but at the end of this week, he wants to come away with a prize and be able to present himself as a defining American president.
Yeah, absolutely. Just noting some of the people in the room. The Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, is there. He was sitting there to the left of Mohammed bin Salman, and Prince Turki, the former ambassador to Washington, was sat next to the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, to the right of Donald Trump. They're standing now and meeting the dignitaries. But, you know, Mark, over the course of the last few months, as we've been documenting President Trump's second time in office, Trump 2.0, as it is known, what we have known and learned from his first time in office is Donald Trump, you know, does things differently. He pushes the boundaries of what are the norms. And you mentioned there Steve Witkoff, who is his special envoy, but more or less his de facto Secretary of State. We've seen him zip around from negotiating with the Iranians on a possible nuclear deal, talking to the Qataris and the Israelis, the Egyptians in Doha. And I was there earlier in the year when he struck up that ceasefire deal just a day before Donald Trump's inauguration. And of course, he's been in and out of the Kremlin, talking to Vladimir Putin, trying to get both sides, the Ukrainians and the Russians, to the negotiating table. This is a president who changes the rule book. He throws the rule book out and he brings in friends, you know, family to strike these deals for him. Steve Witkoff is someone who you would say is perhaps the Jared Kushner of this presidency, close to the family, close to the president. Perhaps, you know, not necessarily someone who fully grasps and understands all the issues, but he's firm in what he wants. And when he talks and when he enters a room, those who are dealing with him know that it is directly from the president's mouth, and he has spent time talking to the president. In fact, his office was supposed to be in the State Department. They moved it closer to the president's office because they were in constant and direct talks. He takes his own private jet, for example, to these places. And speaking of jets, Mark, just give us a bit of an update, because there's so much color around what the Qataris are offering President Trump, this palace in the sky, $400 million jet that he's offering. So many ethical questions around that as Boeing continues to rebuild Air Force One and give it a bit of a revamp.
Yeah, I guess that is the main controversy at the moment. It emerged over the weekend. There'd been noises for quite some time that the Qataris wanted to gift Donald Trump this palace in the skies, a Qatari 747-800, the most modern jumbo jet there is, that the Saudi royal family owned. You can imagine what it looks like inside. There's a lot of gold. Donald Trump loves it. It was, by coincidence or not, in Palm Beach at the airport in Florida, near Mar-a-Lago a few months ago. Donald Trump took a look at it. He liked the look of it. The problem that he has got is he wants a new plane now. Air Force One is really old. There are two planes that form the fleet of Air Force One. They're very, very old indeed, 30, 40 years old. They are due to be replaced, but Boeing is delaying, and they're now not due to be delivered, the new planes, until after Donald Trump leaves office. And so the Qataris stepped in and said, well, here you go, have one of ours. Now, naturally, this is causing all sorts of controversy, but because of, you know, the idea of them just gifting the United States president something of such huge value, and optically what that looks like in terms of ethics. Nevertheless, in true to form, with such simple messaging, Donald Trump commented on it yesterday, and he said, look, what, do you expect me to pay a load of money for this when they're going to give it for free? And he kind of just left it at that. There are those security issues over the course of the day. Today, there's been security officials raising the issue of you know, bugs in the plane or whatever else. It is a security issue for a foreign nation to give the American president a jet like this. Look, we'll see where that goes. I don't think the Qataris are due to hand over this plane anytime soon. Although that said, I heard today that it is actually already in the United States, somewhere down in Texas, being refurbished. Let's see. I didn't think Donald Trump would want a second-hand plane, but there you go.
Absolutely. Not to mention the special features that Air Force One is supposed to have. We still don't have the details of whether those special features have been included in this palace in the skies. Essentially, it's supposed to be able to stand any sort of doomsday scenario. So we'll have to see how that sort of evolves. But Mark, for now, I'm going to keep you there and bring in Dr. H.A. Hellier, who is a senior fellow in security studies at the Royal United Services Institute for Defence and Security Studies in London. Thank you so much for joining us here on the programme. This is a historic trip. We know that Donald Trump chose Saudi Arabia, and there was much controversy at the time, questions asked about why he chose Saudi Arabia. But this is a nation that has transformed. Donald Trump himself has said, we're a little bit older. Saudi Arabia is more, wealthier. So no surprises really that he chose this region, the Gulf states, to make this tour, and he's expecting big investments, big deals to come out of it.
Well, thank you for having me on your program, Yalda. I think it's simply indicative of how the American president views international relations. It's very much a transactional affair. It's not just Saudi Arabia that he's visiting on this trip, of course. He's visiting Qatar and the UAE. All three countries are expected to make tremendous investments into the United States, many of which will be announced during this trip, some of which have been announced already. When it comes to Saudi in particular, this is obviously the biggest country in the Gulf when it comes to these sorts of investments, and beyond that as well. You'll remember that Donald Trump's first presidential trip in his first term was also to Saudi Arabia, again reflecting this transactional sort of relationship. Saudi has tried quite hard already in just the last few months to build close relations with Washington, D.C. It's played this role of mediation with regards to Russia and the United States, has involved itself in the Ukrainian issue as well. So it's not much of a surprise, but primarily, I think, because of the transactional nature of the Trump administration's approach to international affairs.
Yeah, and I think it also places Saudi Arabia in a very interesting place this time round. I mean, we've often viewed Saudi Arabia as a regional player, but we can see how much, MBS and Saudi Arabia has transformed itself and moved beyond being just a regional player to an actual global player in those conflicts that you've talked about. And Donald Trump, respects the strongman, and he sees that in Mohammed bin Salman. And perhaps he will be quite surprised by how much this country has changed and evolved, versus the last time he was here.
Perhaps that's entirely possible, I'm sure. I do think it's more about what investments he expects to get from Saudi into the United States. Saudi is, of course, focused regionally and domestically. I mean, primarily, its focus has been on changing the direction within, and it's actually a function of that desire that it is sought to have a more powerful regional role. But regional role in terms of pushing for de-escalation. And I think these things are all linked, that its desire to engage more effectively in the region and lessening tensions. You see that vis-a-vis Iran. You see that vis-a-vis how the last Gulf spat, of course, that took place and then ended just before Trump came into office. All of that is linked to Riyadh's desire to be in a region that is more stable so they can focus on developing things at home. And again, when it comes to Trump, I think he's just seeing this is a country that is looking to develop internally, those opportunities for American business on this trip. I think you're going to see quite a lot of talk about that, where the Saudis are going to say, we have the funds. You have the expertise. We want to bring that into the kingdom. It's the same sort of impetus that I think you'll see in other ways in the UAE, particularly in the AI arena. because they want to be an AI hub. I think Saudi does as well. With regards to the Qataris, it's a little bit different. I think for them, it's much more about signifying the strong defense relationship that they have with the United States as a preferred NATO, a non-NATO partner. There's a particular designation that they have that they're quite keen to emphasize. And of course, they have their own mediation role, which has been quite extensive on different files, including on Gaza, in the past on Afghanistan and elsewhere.
Yeah, and as you say, the focus of this meeting will be economics, but geopolitics is never far from the agenda in this region. And perhaps while top of the agenda won't be the situation in Gaza, we know that the United States is in talks with Hamas. An American-Israeli hostage was released. You mentioned there the Iran nuclear deal as well. 8 years ago, Mohammed bin Salman was celebrating the fact that Donald Trump was stepping away from that. But today, he wants him to engage with that. Are we expecting, do you think, the Saudis behind closed doors to put pressure on Donald Trump to try and find some kind of resolution to the Palestinian question? Because, of course, both the United States and in many ways Saudi Arabia do want to reach some form of normalization with the Israelis.
There's a few things here. First of all, I don't think normalization is on the table. I think that discussion has been put into deep freeze because the Saudis are completely unwilling to entertain the idea of normalization with Tel Aviv and the Israelis without significant transformation in Israel's approach vis-a-vis the Palestinians. And they've made the establishment of a Palestinian state to be a precondition of that. So I don't think we're going to see any talk around normalization on this trip, and probably not for quite some time due to Israeli transigence on these issues. I do think that on the Iranian file, there's going to be a lot of encouragement from Riyadh in private and perhaps in public, if not on this trip, then in the future, where they're encouraging the United States to move towards finding some sort of a deal with Iran. Because, as you know, they were quite pleased some years back by the United States distancing itself from the JCPOA. But I think that they've really changed their perspective now for two reasons. One, they've de-escalated with Iran more generally. So the threat of Iran, as far as the Saudis is concerned, is not quite the same as it once was. It still exists. They're still concerned about Iranian influence in terms of the regime in different parts of the region. But that's changed quite dramatically. That's changed with regards to Lebanon and Hezbollah. It definitely changed with regards to Syria, which is another topic to watch for over this trip, to see if Donald Trump will announce any change of sanctions and meet Syrian President Ahmed al-Shara. But also when it comes to Iran more generally, the relationship between Tehran and Riyadh has become warmer. And finally, I think that in the Gulf more generally, whereas you might have seen, say, 10 years ago, more of a desire for escalation to try to put, quote unquote, Iran in its place, there's a realization in the region that if conflict breaks out, it's going to be those countries in the region that will pay the greatest price. So if there's a war, for example, between Iran and the United States, it's going to be Saudi that pays the price. It's going to be the UAE. It's going to be American allies in the region that will pay a price. And they don't see the benefit of that. So in that regard, I think things are moving towards de-escalation further and further vis-a-vis Iran and the US. And I think Saudi is favorable towards that.
H.A. Helia, thank you very much for all of your analysis and thoughts following this historic arrival of Donald Trump into Riyadh. And we can see those live images of Donald Trump at the royal court with Mohammed bin Salman. We'll be back with all the latest developments with myself and the team here on the ground, including my colleague Mark Stone, who is at that US-Saudi investment summit. We'll be getting all the live developments. But for now, Gareth, back to you in the studio.
Yauda, thank you so much. Well, actually, Mark, we won't let you go. We'll keep you for a little longer as we watch these images from Riyadh, just coming up to 20 to 1 local time. We talk lots about the geopolitics, about all the things that need to be achieved as Elon Musk there is joining his former boss when he was heading up that Doge office and now meeting Mohammed bin Salman. What do the next few hours have in store for these gentlemen? What is the timeline looking like?
Well, look, before we go on to that, look, there is an image. You have the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, you have the richest man in the world, and you have perhaps the most consequential president in modern history. The three men are all together. Some might see this on the American side as a conflict of interest, given that Elon Musk has been, maybe still is, part of the US government. Or you could see it simply as American investment in Saudi Arabia, bringing America's best businessmen here to the kingdom to do business. You know, Gareth, 2 weeks ago, I was in a community centre in the outskirts of Detroit, Michigan, with Donald Trump, where he was meeting his base, meeting the people of a downtrodden part of the United States that feels a million miles from the palace-like building that I'm standing in now. What is the connection between that and this? Well, if you are Donald Trump with his Make America Great Again tag, then the connection is investment. It is Donald Trump coming to this part of the world, not cap in hand, but coming here to encourage investment, two-way investment, encourage Middle Eastern countries who are now more powerful, richer than they have been ever, to invest in the United States. And the price tag is $1 trillion. That is what Mohammed bin Salman, the man on the right there, says he will invest in the United States over the next 4 years. I think, to be honest, that is an inspirational figure, maybe a figure that will never be realized. I think it almost meets the GDP of this country. Nevertheless, that sort of detail doesn't matter. We're talking about big investment as far as Donald Trump is concerned. I was looking at the number of hands that Donald Trump had to shake just now. He's known not to particularly like shaking hands. Well, he wouldn't have liked this then, because he must have shaken about I don't know, 100 hands. He had a bruise on his hand a few weeks ago, and the White House put that down to the fact that he is shaking too many people's hands. We also saw the Crown Prince meeting the top tier of Donald Trump's administration, the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, who, of course, is now the National Security Advisor as well. He met the Commerce Secretary, Howard Lutnick, the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, key figures, of course, at the heart of Donald Trump's tariff war with the whole world, which incidentally includes Saudi Arabia, who must have wondered recently about why they were being tariffed. You know, America for so many years has been preaching the benefits of free trade with the likes of Saudi Arabia, and then suddenly they find themselves with all these tariffs whacked onto them. Maybe they will dissolve over the course of this week as Donald Trump signs deals. There will be defense pacts as well with Saudi Arabia. There's already a big defense alliance with Qatar, where he will go next. But you can be sure that will be all wrapped up in this visit as well. And then underlying it all, what will be the dominant story at the end of the week? Honestly, Gareth, who knows? Will it be some sort of a breakthrough in Ukraine? Will Donald Trump end up deviating away, or diverting, I should say, away from the Middle East and heading instead to Istanbul? He will, if Putin and Zelensky both meet there, as he has urged them to do. If Putin doesn't turn up, then Trump won't turn up either. Or will it be some sort of a breakthrough on Gaza? I doubt it very much. But I suppose one man who might be feeling a little nervous, as he is doubtless watching these images, is the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu. There was a world in which he would be here if things hadn't gone the way they have in his neighborhood. Then normalization with Saudi Arabia may not have come yet, but it would be close, and you could imagine a world where he would be here as well. He's been to Saudi Arabia before. Instead, he is not here, and the people surrounding Donald Trump over the next few days will be Arabs. It's often said that Donald Trump listens to the loudest voice or the last voice in the room. Well, all the voices in the room over the course of the next few days will be Arab voices. If you're Benjamin Netanyahu, that I think will make you feel a little uncomfortable.
As we're watching these images, Mark, I can't help but wonder what's on those pieces of paper that have been passed on to the president there. There was a long consideration to what that...
Maybe they're checks.
Maybe. I'm sure an eagle-eyed photographer will have got a good angle on those, and we'll find out in due course. You talk about the investment. This, though, is the challenge for the president, is it not? The impact of the tariffs is felt in the second. The market reacts immeasurably at times, and yin-yangs back and forth, and we've seen stocks fall, we've seen them rise again. The challenge, though, is that investment takes years and years and years. So he can tout these big figures, but the impact of them, the impact of those business deals, will take a lot longer to be felt.
Which is why he is doing all he can with his team around him to march everyone back down to the bottom of the hill again after that Liberation Day moment, his moment to assert authority on the world, as he did with those extraordinary that extraordinary moment in the Rose Garden, where it was kind of like watching the Eurovision Song Contest. What score did the world's nations get? What tariff score? And then slowly he is doing deals which his team will spin as Trump's effective ability to be able to strike deals, to lower tariffs, to get a better deal for the United States. But when you lift the bonnet of some of the deals that have been done, the one with the UK, the one with China, actually it looks as though things are pretty much as they were before Liberation Day. Nevertheless, both on the UK trade deal, on the China trade deal, it is the case that what that has done, what this sort of the chaos of the past few weeks has done, has engaged different teams. You know, that the Brits now feel that they know their American counterparts very well, so they can build on the little that they have got already, and it's not insignificant that they were the first nation in the world to strike that deal. They can build on that to come to some sort of a post-Brexit trade deal with the United States down the line. With China, it's great news that they're talking. No one expected a breakthrough to come so quickly as it appeared to in Geneva on Saturday, or Sunday was it, but it did, and the fact is there is now dialogue between the Chinese and the Americans. That's clearly good news, and on Wall Street, as you say, the markets reacted accordingly. But yes, of course, $1 trillion from Saudi Arabia to the United States, if that is ever realized in that number, it will probably be quite a bit smaller, but it will take time. Investment will take time. But it's all about tech. It's all about AI. That's why Elon Musk is here. That's why Sam Altman of OpenAI is here. Many, many other figures as well. This is a big week for American diplomacy and for American commerce.
Big win as well for Mohammed bin Salman in many respects, because in previous years he was frozen out by the West. There was every world leader strains not to shake his hand following the killing of Jamal Khashoggi, the journalist in the embassy in Turkey. It was alleged and quite strongly linked to the Crown Prince. He's denied those allegations, but he was frozen out and has stood the test of time by being present in post, and eventually people like Donald Trump have come back and brought him back into the fold. And we saw there that personal welcome at the steps of Air Force One when it touched down. A really remarkable scene. It's not something that is afforded to many people, and equally is quite the turn of fortune compared to where we were 5, 7, 10 years ago.
Yeah, a remarkable turnaround. I remember when President Biden came here a few years ago now, and I mean, he had the good fortune of it being COVID, so he didn't need to shake Mohammed bin Salman's hand, but I don't think he would have done. Instead, he gave him a fist pump, because just those few years ago, this country was kind of a pariah. You mentioned the Khashoggi murder. That was a moment where nations and companies deserted the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. There were investment conferences where one by one global business leaders cancelled and just didn't turn up. Now, what a turnaround. He is the constant here. He is the Crown Prince. He is still here. He's turning his country around. He's making his country more open, culturally, socially, economically, and I guess political expedience. People are just realizing they cannot ignore this place, and they are coming back and they are enjoying every moment.
Let's stay there for us, will you, Mark? Well, let's bring in our business presenter, Darren McCaffrey, who's also joining us from our newsroom in Sky HQ. Darren, this is a trip all about business, trade, deals, investment, infrastructure, development. How will the markets be responding to this, do you think, when they open up in about, 4.5 hours' time? 3.5.
Yeah, very good morning to you, Gareth. I think the key thing here is it is, unsurprisingly, a reciprocal relationship in many regards. President Trump is looking for significant new investment in the US economy. Saudi Arabia, after decades of an oil boom, has got that money. And ultimately, he is hoping that Saudi Arabia is going to be part of lots of inward investments in the United States, effectively that will help boost the US economy, will lead to job creation, and of course, domestic manufacturing. That is essentially what Donald Trump is trying to achieve as part of this tour. What is interesting is that Saudi Arabia also need something out of this relationship. In essence, this is an oil-rich economy that has lasted and sustained itself for decades on oil. And yet, effectively, the world's slowly, sometimes ad hoc, sometimes it ebbs and it flows, but the world is moving away ultimately from oil, and Saudi Arabia is having to change its economy, Gareth, if you like. That is why it's looking for new economic relationships. Why not have that with the world's largest economy, i.e. the United States? But it is also why we're seeing Saudi Arabia get involved in tourism. It's starting a massive new airline out of Riyadh to try and make it a global hub for the airline industry. It is getting involved, as we've seen quite substantially, in hosting sporting events over the last couple of years. So ultimately, this is about two different countries coming together, but coming together primarily, in essence, trying to forge an economic relationship. And these are big sums of money. The Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia is saying that they would like to invest some £450 billion, $600 billion in the United States over the next 4 years. President Trump saying he would like to see that go to $1 trillion, including the purchase of more US military equipment by Saudi Arabia. So it's complex, it is a lot of money, but it is a relationship in which both countries hope they will be benefactors from.
We're just hearing, Darren, from Saudi State TV that the US and Gulf Cooperation Council states will hold a summit in Riyadh on Wednesday during Donald Trump's visit. That's also being brought to us by the Reuters news agency. We talk about the tariffs, the deals. Mark alluded to the fact that the ones with the UK and China, with the US, maybe aren't quite as rosy as they seem and kind of reset the relationship back to what it was. It does pose the question, doesn't it? Calming the hornet's nest back down after kicking it in the first place, did it need to be kicked? You know, there is that question. Did we need to get to a point where an island off the coast of Australia inhabited only by penguins needed to be slapped with tariffs like the rest of the world, like Saudi Arabia, like the United Arab Emirates, like China and the UK? Donald Trump putting his best foot forward now, but he's treading a path that he laid in the first place.
Yeah, and that's almost the impossible thing to work out here is, with so-called Liberation Day, what was Donald Trump hoping to achieve? Many would say, ultimately, he likes to chuck down a marker, if you like. He likes to cause an enormous fuss to begin with. And that ultimately that is the art of the deal, if you like, which is to kind of go in hard and then negotiate downwards. Now, the White House would like to say that's essentially what they've done. Others would suggest, and I've read a lot over the last day or so, that effectively, particularly when it comes to China, the United States blinked first. That in the end, with those prohibitive tariffs, what Scott Bessent, the US Treasury Secretary, essentially said was a trade embargo with China, the two world's largest, biggest economies. That wasn't sustainable. You had major American companies like Walmart and Target effectively saying the shelves would be empty in the United States, that Donald Trump caved in. So ultimately, I think there is an argument to say that Donald Trump created this very difficult economic situation for himself, an unsustainable economic situation, and then in the end has had to roll back. Now, he would suggest he's got lots of great deals, they're talking to China, and that they will continue to deal with China and get a better deal. But in the end, Donald Trump does fundamentally understand that politics, particularly in the United States, probably more so than anywhere else in the world, is completely linked in terms of the American perception to what the economy's doing and to people's personal wealth. And so that is why I think he has turned a corner when it comes to tariffs. He is raising, by the way, billions of dollars from the tariffs that are already in place, that bottom base 10%. But it is also why he is in Saudi Arabia today. As you say, that Saudi Arabia's sovereign wealth funds, which controls assets of $925 billion, has got numerous investments in the United States, includes everything from Ubers to electronic arts to electric car firms. Donald Trump wants to see that investment increase massively. He wants to see the Saudis buy a lot more American arms. That is what he is trying to achieve with this tour, with these meetings today.
You're watching Sky News. Just a reminder of what we are seeing. This is Donald Trump in Saudi Arabia to kick off a Middle East tour. He was greeted by Mohammed bin Salman, the Saudi Crown Prince, the de facto ruler. There he is, centre of your screen. Top firms have also joined the US President and the Crown Prince for this visit. We've also seen the Secretary of State for the US, Marco Rubio, the Defense Secretary, Pete Hegseth, the Commerce Secretary, Howard Lutnick, and also Donald Trump's envoy, Steve Witkoff, all in that photo lineup, that first sit-down between the two countries. They will move on as well to Qatar and the UAE. And as we've been hearing from our correspondent Mark Stone and also from our business presenter Darren McCaffrey, the key aim here is all about trade and investment and development of relations between the two countries. Mark, you were following Team Trump. What was the atmosphere like in the White House, in the administration, ahead of this visit?
Buoyed, I think, excited, because they believe there are so many opportunities for this trip. I mean, as we've been saying, Donald Trump, actually it was hard to know as we boarded the flight to come here, it was hard to pin down which story would be the dominant one, because he's throwing himself at so many different challenges now, and I guess hoping that the stars will align, that one or two of them will land. I'm talking about geopolitical challenges that underlie what is, as you say, outwardly at least, an investment opportunity for both sides. But underlying that, of course, there is the Saudis' role in mediating, or at least hosting, the Russians and the Americans, as they did just a few months ago, in terms of trying to broker some sort of a ceasefire, a peace in Ukraine. The Saudis clearly have a very, very close eye on what is happening in Gaza. And as we've been discussing, the State Department has confirmed this morning that indeed they will be talking to the Saudis about how to bring about a ceasefire and a lasting peace in Gaza, which is now a form of leverage for the Saudis. The Saudis can easily say, and Mohammed bin Salman behind the scenes may well be saying to Donald Trump, look, we will invest in America. We are investing in America. We will continue to. And by the way, down the line, we might well normalize relations with Israel, which we know you want us to do. But you need to give us something on Palestine. And as you were discussing with your guest a moment ago, they are looking for a lasting peace, a pathway to a Palestinian state. That is a red line for the Saudis. So a big moment indeed. Just gone 1 o'clock here in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, as you look at the images of two very powerful men globally, Donald Trump on the right, Mohammed bin Salman on the left. Of course, both of those two men were President and Crown Prince 8 years ago when Donald Trump was last here. It was then his first foreign trip in his first presidency, and it is again his first foreign diplomatic trip in this, his second term, where he has proved in 113 days or so to be such a consequential president. And you can be sure that over the course of the next 3 days, 3 Arab countries, 3 Gulf Arab nations will be vying to outdo do the other one. He's here first in Saudi Arabia. Tomorrow he goes to Qatar, then to the United Arab Emirates. And after that, who knows? Maybe he will end up in Istanbul if he manages to get Zelensky and Putin together around a table. I say a big if. I'm not putting my money on that. But yeah, this is a big moment, without question.
Mark, you referenced the geopolitical challenges. I was just trying to write a list as you were talking there. And we've got, from the United States perspective, Russia and Ukraine, of course. They've been in negotiations and also airstrikes against the Houthis in Yemen. They're still keen to figure out a new deal with Iran. They're trying to work with Israel and Hamas with the situation on Gaza, trade deal with China, trade with, let's be honest, the entire planet. It goes on and on. Is there the capacity within the administration? Is there the strength and endurance within the administration to keep all of this up at this kind of tempo?
Goodness knows, goodness knows. But I think he is betting on everything, galloping multiple horses at the same time in a Trumpian way. If he falls off one horse, he'll let that one fall by the wayside and then concentrate on the thing he thinks he can get. And as I say, we don't yet know what that might be at the end of this week. Maybe it'll be none of the big geopolitical challenges, but then he will put massive topspin on the money and the investment opportunities that he has come away with on this first trip. The other thing I'm looking out for, as we watch the body language, is the potential of who he might meet, because there is going to be a meeting of Gulf Arab leaders and indeed Arab leaders from the wider Arab world later on today, at which Donald Trump will be the guest of honor. And it is, we think, that the new Syrian president, Ahmed Shara, will be at that meeting. Now that, if he meets Donald Trump, will be in itself an extraordinary moment. Remember, this is a man who took over as president after the fall of Bashar al-Assad and his exile to Moscow. This is a man who was imprisoned for several years in Iraq. He was in American custody in Iraq between 2006 and 2011 for fighting the Americans there in the insurgency that took place in Iraq. He was a jihadist fighter turned Syrian president. He put to one side his jihadist views, became the president, and now has the prospect perhaps of meeting the American president. And what he wants, of course, is America to remove sanctions against a new Syria. And President Trump certainly hinted that he'd like to give that country a fresh start. So there's one moment to watch if it comes. I think I just spotted behind this man here Sam Altman, who is the boss of OpenAI, a tech powerhouse himself in the United States, one of many tech leaders who has come here to Saudi Arabia as part of the American delegation to meet the Crown Prince. There he is, Sam Altman there, meeting Donald Trump and the Crown Prince.
Again, Mark, another remarkable scene. Sam Altman, like you say, leading OpenAI. They'd been challenged by startups in China that are alleged to do the same, but for much, much cheaper. And I'm sure Donald Trump would be very keen to put American tech first and foremost in these conversations with these key regional partners. But interesting, of course, that he's not the only highly, highly wealthy tech bro, shall we say, in this lineup. Going before him was the world's richest man, Elon Musk. And these images are remarkable. And these opportunities for these tech billionaires and multimillionaires is hugely important.
I wish we had a lip reader, and then we could get a clear sense of what these moments are all about. It's fascinating to watch. You're right, Elon Musk was there a little bit earlier on, and conflict of interest, given that he's both a member of the administration, or maybe he isn't anymore. It's not quite so clear right now, but also the world's richest man with massive fingers in many pies when it comes to business. He would like to do much more business here, of course. No, not a conflict of interest, so the White House would say, because it is only natural for an American president, when he comes on a business trip, to bring the brightest and the best from his own country to the host country to be able to shake those hands and to hopefully sign business deals. So that, on the face of it, is what all this is about. But it's so intertwined with geopolitics in so many areas right now.
You're watching Sky News. It is 11 in the morning in London, 1 in the afternoon in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. We're seeing pictures here, live pictures of the US President Donald Trump meeting various guests and dignitaries alongside Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, the de facto ruler of that country. And these have been remarkable scenes. These handshakes and greetings have gone on for many, many minutes now in a way that I don't think we often see with world leaders. Mark Stone's joining us. Also joining us is Jasmine El-Gamal, a political analyst and former Middle East advisor at the US Department of Defense. Good to have you with us here on Sky News. What do you make of what you're seeing?
Well, thanks for having me, Gareth. I think this is an extraordinary moment that we're witnessing and a real turning point in the relationship between the U.S. and the Gulf and the U.S. and the Arab world. If you'll remember, Donald Trump also went to Saudi Arabia as his first international trip back in his first term. But the context and the messaging and the lens through which that region and the country was viewed was completely different. Back then, it was about extremism. There was an inauguration of a global center to combat extremism. Trump was speaking to the Arab world, to the Muslim world about extremism. You know, that it was sort of a conflict lens, a security lens. What we're seeing now is completely different. It's all about economic opportunity. It's about mutually beneficial deal making. It's about prosperity for both countries. It's about partnership. So it's a very, very different vision. It's a very different time now that we're seeing. And you were just talking about all the business leaders, the tech leaders, excuse me, that are showing up with Donald Trump, eager to ink these deals that will expand their footprint in the region and also benefit the United States at the same time. And so we're seeing right now, I think, a really historic moment in the making.
What would you have advised the various US delegations ahead of this meeting? What would you have said they would have wanted to have achieved in this three-day tour? And what would you have said the recipient countries, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the UAE, will want to achieve from this tour?
Well, look, I think that this is one of those rare moments when everybody really seems to be exactly on the same page. You know, the Saudi crown prince, you know, he's had this Vision 2030 for quite a while, which a large part of it is about diversifying away from an oil economy and looking at things like tech and AI. And defense and other things that they can invest their money in. And similarly, they want things from the U.S. as well. They don't want to just invest in the U.S. They want the U.S. to invest in Saudi Arabia. And so you're seeing this moment when the two visions are converging. Donald Trump's vision of economic prosperity for the U.S. And as we all know, Donald Trump is a very transactional president. His worldview is that of what can you do for me? And at the same time, you have a Saudi crown prince who's very focused on stability in the region, on economic prosperity. His population is very, very young. The economy is booming. The culture is booming. All of these things are happening in Saudi Arabia, where now you have these two visions converging, where you have an opportunity for this mutually beneficial deals, these mutually beneficial deals that I'm talking about that can benefit both countries in every sector, tech, AI, health, defense. And that's why you see so many people jumping on the opportunity to join President Trump on this trip to try to see how they can contribute to that vision. And of course, because they're private companies as well, what they can get out of it. But this is really about trying to find a prosperous, a secure path forward for the region and a very different relationship with the US than one that we've seen before.
There are two key countries who will be looking on at this three-day visit, Iran and Israel. Israel obviously will feel the snub to some degree, I'm sure, that they have not had a day's itinerary added and a visit from the US president. What will Iran and Israel, respectively, be thinking, doing, saying in response to the scenes they're going to see over the next 3 days?
Well, that's a really good question. And those are exactly the two countries that are looking at what's happening right now and trying to think about what that means for them. I mean, Iran has gotten the memo. They understand that this is a president who is open to making deals and who doesn't want to see or be involved in any further conflict in the region. President Trump has been sustaining and fighting quite a bit of domestic pressure, even within his own administration, from people who want the US to go to war with Iran. He's not about war. He wants to find a peaceful resolution to these issues. And so we've seen that in these direct talks between Steve Witkoff and the Iranians. The most recent one happened just a few days ago, which was reportedly a positive one. So Iran has gotten the memo. Israel, not so much. Prime Minister Netanyahu continues to see the region from a purely military sense. He's out of step with this Trump administration. And you can see that in the tension between Donald Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu. And you can see that in the fact that Israel is not a stop on this tour. It's a very significant omission by the president. And also the defense secretary, Pete Hegseth, canceled a trip to Israel as well. Netanyahu is under pressure both domestically and internationally because of the way that he refuses to get to an end to the war in Gaza. He's refusing to negotiate ceasefires. He's refusing to let humanitarian aid into the Strip. He continues his bombing campaign in Syria, in Gaza, and being very aggressive when it comes to how to deal with Iran. And that's just not simply the mood right now. What you're seeing in front of us, look, I'm watching the scenes and have been watching them all morning. The mood is one of security, conflict resolution, and mutual prosperity. And Prime Minister Netanyahu seems to be offering only a vision of conflict and seems to be a real spoiler when it comes to this positive vision that everyone else that you're seeing on your screen has right now. So this was a very strong message to him that if you're not going to get on board with this, you're going to be left out.
You were a former advisor at the US Department of Defense, and you say there that Donald Trump, and he's expressed this in so many interviews over so many years, does not want the United States to be dragged into more conflicts. The reality is, though, the United States' military budget is north of $850 billion. It is the most powerful military in the world. Can he achieve his aims through deals and diplomacy alone? Or will he get to a point that, to some degree, and I'm not advocating conflict here, but to some degree, he will need to look to defense too? Or can he achieve everything he wants to just through the power of the US dollar?
I think that's a really good question. And I think it very much is dependent on the current climate in the region. If you had asked me that question a few months ago, a few years ago, the answer might have been different. But I think we're at this really unique and promising moment when the mood, both in the region and in the US, is one that is conciliatory, that is tired of conflict, and that wants to see a better future for both peoples, for Americans and for people in the Middle East. The Middle East has a very young population, like I said. There's a lot of potential in this region, and people are sick of war. And now you have these powerhouses in the region, the Gulf countries, the UAE, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, that really want to look towards investing. They want to look towards security and stability and ending wars in the region. You see them very involved in trying to help Syria turn a new page. You see them involved in trying to help Iran move to a different place. So the Saudi Arabia and Iran have had a détente for a while now, where the Saudis don't necessarily want to be involved or dragged into wars either. They have this Vision 2030 that they're trying to implement. They're trying to diversify their economy. They're trying to move forward. The buzzwords that you hear right now when you're in the Gulf are things like tech and AI and healthcare and investment. You're not looking at an interest in fomenting more conflict. Now, that's not to say, and I have to say this, otherwise I would be disingenuous. That's not to say that everything that is happening is positive. We're looking at there are still conflicts in Libya and Yemen and Sudan, and of course the tragedy and the awful situation in Gaza, which, as we all know now, it's been over 2 months that any humanitarian assistance has gotten into Gaza. People are starving. People are still under bombardment. The hostages are still, hostages still remain there. There is a lot that is still wrong and potentially dangerous in the region. And the actors that we're talking about now, the Gulf countries, are not always playing a positive role, and there's no getting around that. But I think what you're seeing right now is an attempt to move away from conflict and more towards things like investment and prosperity and security, and that hopefully that has a ripple effect across the region and starts to move the entire region away from these conflicts and more towards an area of peace and stability. It won't happen overnight, but I think what we're seeing right now is a positive step in the right direction. And like I said, my criticism of the Biden administration was that it really viewed the region through a very military, very securitized lens, and it tied everything to Israel. It tied further talks on defense issues with Saudi Arabia to normalization with Israel. But now the Biden administration is decoupling those issues. It's looking at these Arab countries for who they are, for what they are, not necessarily for what they can provide vis-a-vis Israel. And I think that's a positive step, because you can make progress at different points and at different speeds with different countries, and trying to tie all of this together doesn't necessarily help.
What does Europe do in this situation? Because Donald Trump likes a strongman leader, people like Mohammed bin Salman, who for many years was ostracized by the West. He likes Vladimir Putin, he likes Xi Jinping. He vibes with those kind of characters, but they are characters that generally Europe and other Western countries and Western-aligned countries find problematic and have challenges with. Do they just have to pinch their noses and go, well, it's the United States, it's the White House, it's the president of the USA, we're going to have to go along with the ride? Or do they vocalize some of their reservations and frustrations?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the answer is yes, but, I think the Europeans we're seeing right now are having to go along and deal with the US. You saw the leaders engaging quite heavily with Donald Trump on issues like tariffs and Ukraine and Russia, that they are doing it because it is the US and they have to. But at the same time, they are trying to find a way forward as Europeans that doesn't necessarily tie them so closely and make them so dependent on the US. I think, figures like Emmanuel Macron have been saying for years that Europe shouldn't be dependent every 4 years on a US election to figure out what's going to happen to Europe and with Europe. And so that is happening at the same time. But I have to tell you, and this is something that we know, Donald Trump doesn't try to hide this. His worldview is not one that is based on mutual interests and values and all the things that we've seen Democratic administrations in the US focus on. This is an administration that it's focused on tangible gains for the US, that's focused on economic issues, that's focused on trade issues, and that's very transactional, that's very focused on what can you do for me? And you see that in the really the massive difference in the way that the Trump administration, not just Trump himself, but his cabinet members as well, the way that they talk about the Gulf versus the way they talk about Europe, where they talk about the Gulf as this land of opportunity. We can do so much business with them. Look at that delegation that's arrived in Saudi Arabia with Donald Trump, banks and the tech sector and CEOs, and they're all there ready to start making deals and find opportunities. Whereas when the Signal chat was leaked, that was talking about the strike on the the Houthis, you really saw the disdain sort of dripping from people like Vice President J.D. Vance and Defense Secretary Hegseth towards Europe, where they call them freeloaders and they call them, what are they doing for us? They have nothing to offer us. And so I think that's really interesting to see the way that the U.S. has looked, that this administration, that the tables have sort of turned, and where they're looking at the Gulf as the land of opportunity and as people that they have something in common with, versus the Europeans, which traditionally the U.S. has always dealt with based on common values.
You're watching Sky News as we see these live images from Riyadh, hearing from Jasmine El-Gamal, political analyst, former Middle East advisor at the US Department of Defense. Our US correspondent, Mark Stone, is also live in Riyadh for us. And Mark, I was just looking on X, and unsurprisingly, the owner of X, Elon Musk, has already retweeted a picture of him from about 10 minutes or so ago, joining Mohammed bin Salman and Donald Trump. There's a picture of the three of them with the press taking photographs in the background. Have we seen anything like this before from the Trump administration? We know he loves to be the centre of attention. We know he loves those Oval Office meetings and sparring with the press. But the fact that we're almost, close to an hour in and still shaking hands, it seems like a remarkable set piece for the president at the moment.
Yeah, and he loves the opulence of places like this. The building I'm in at the moment kind of resembles Versailles or maybe Mar-a-Lago, but it's a little bit newer than both Versailles and Mar-a-Lago. And that speaks to just how far this country has come so fast. Your point about Elon Musk is really interesting. And it speaks to the point I was just about to make, which is that each individual moment that we've been watching over the course of, what is it, probably nearly 3/4 of an hour now, each handshake is such an important moment for the person who is meeting the principals, the person who is meeting the president and the crown prince. It's really hard to get an audience with the president of the United States. It's even harder, I'd say, to get an audience with the crown prince. And in a business setting, through a business lens, these moments, short as they are, a handshake, a few words here and there, for those business leaders, it is massively important to make an impact in that moment, say what you want to say very quickly to both leaders, and then take the photograph or take the screenshot of that moment of you meeting them. Of course, if you're Elon Musk, it kind of doesn't matter because you're the world's richest man anyway. But for many of the other people who have just met the two leaders there, whether it's a Saudi or a Middle Eastern wanting to do investment in the United States, they've got their moment with the president. The same is true for the crown prince. And then they take that moment, they take that screenshot, and they can then develop the relationship there. So that's what we're seeing. That's what we're seeing here. There's Sam Altman there, the head of OpenAI. That is what we've been witnessing over the course of nearly an hour now. Small talk, but massively important talk.
I'm just looking. As yet, Sam Altman hasn't reposted his moment, but I'm sure that is to come. And like you say, the optics around this are vitally important for all of those who are lining up to press the flesh. It's also vitally important for Saudi Arabia, isn't it? How is this being positioned in Saudi? How are the authorities and the press positioning this trip?
Well, they're not criticising Donald Trump. There's none of that here. And so I think he'll enjoy that. When he's back home, when he's in Europe, as he will be at some point soon, there is criticism of him and the way he does business, certainly in the media. None of that here. Very, very pro Donald Trump. I was interviewing on our podcast a couple of days ago a very influential and very widely read Saudi journalist, the former director of the Al Arabiya Pan-Arab news network. And he was just saying, look, we love Trump here because he's straightforward, he's transactional, he says what he thinks. And in a Saudi, from a Saudi perspective, that's just great. I mean, they did not get on all that well with President Biden. They did not get on well with Barack Obama. But they did get on well with Donald Trump in his first term, and that is being built upon very, very quickly throughout this second term.
Just hearing, Mark, reports from the Washington Post and Reuters that the US reportedly hoping to strike deals on minerals and chips during this trip. And according to the Washington Post, agreements would enable a newly announced Saudi AI company to access US-made AI chips. How important would that be? It's a booming sector, and it's one that they will be keen to build upon to kind of freeze out, let's be honest, the Chinese.
Precisely. That is what it's all about, trying to pull countries away from China towards the United States, towards the opportunities that Donald Trump sees there. You know, as I mentioned earlier on, 1 minute Donald Trump is among his base in town halls across parts of America, telling them he's going to make America great again. And then he comes here to take the money and take the investment and encourage the investment into America to make it great again, he would hope. You talk about trips as well. Saudi is a massive tourist destination now, or so they would want. You can't really go a week by without a weekend Sunday supplement about how great tourism here is at the moment. So it's about trips as well as chips.